King Lear, Part 3, Night and Storm. Out into the night and storm hurried King Lear, but little he heeded the darkness or the raging of the elements, for now he was mad, really mad. Amid the howling of the blast, cataracts of rain, the rattle of thunder and blinding flashes of lightning, the old man wandered, bareheaded, tearing his white locks and shouting incoherent exclamations to the whirlwind. Blow, wind, and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow, spit fire, spout rain. Nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax not you, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you kingdom, called you children. You owe me nothing. Then let fall your horrible pleasure. Here I stand, your slave, a poor, infirm, weak, and despised old man. Then, his mood altering, he called them the servile ministers of 2 pernicious daughters, who had joined with them in a battle against an old white head. So he went on, raving wildly, while all the time the faithful fool clung to him, half supporting his tottering steps, and still striving with his jests to divert the mind of his heartbroken master. Meanwhile, friends of the king were working on his behalf. Information had reached the Earl of Kent that there was a secret division between Albany and Cornwall, though the face of it was hidden with mutual cunning. Word had been carried to France of the harsh way in which both these sons-in-law had behaved to the old king, and Cordelia was on her way to rescue her father, and had already landed with an army at Dover. The Earl of Gloucester also, disgusted with the brutal behaviour of Regan and her husband, was now on the watch to protect the old man. After King Lear had been driven out into the storm, Gloucester overheard a plot to put him to death. He at once made arrangements to secure his safety, and setting out in search of the fugitives, he found them in a wretched little hovel on the heath, where they had gone for shelter. The poor old man's wits were now entirely gone, and his distracted brain could do nothing but brood over the heartless cruelty of his daughters, which had brought him to this condition. But he was tenderly humoured and watched over by the few followers still left to him, and now by their loyalty he was safely conveyed out of reach of his enemies. Gloucester told Kent there was a litter waiting ready, and bade him take up his master in his arms at once, and carry him to it, and then drive instantly to Dover, where he should receive both welcome and protection. If he delayed in the slightest degree, the king's life and Kent's, and all who offered to defend him, would assuredly be lost. Thanks to the devotion of his faithful friends, the poor old king was safely conveyed to Dover, but a terrible fate rewarded the loyalty of the Earl of Gloucester. Finding out the part he had played in the escape of King Lear, the Duke of Cornwall, with savage barbarity, had both the eyes of the nobleman put out, and then Regan pitilessly bade her servants thrust him forth from his own castle. A just punishment, however, overtook the brutal Earl. One of his own servants, indignant at his cruelty, refused to perform his bidding. Cornwall, enraged, fell upon the man, and they fought. Regan, coming to her husband's assistance, stabbed the servant from behind, but not before the man contrived to wound the Earl so seriously that he soon after died of the injury. King Lear reached Dover safely, and Cordelia was prepared with her most tender affection to welcome her old father. But remorse for the injustice with which he had treated his daughter, and robbed her of her rights, to bestow them on her worthless sisters, so stung King Lear's mind that shame kept him from seeing Cordelia, and he contrived to make his escape from the French camp. Cordelia sent out in search of him, and he was presently found wandering about on the cliffs, all decked out with wildflowers, but still in his madness, assuming the majesty of a king. He was taken back to the camp and placed in the care of a skilful doctor, who said that the chief thing needed to cure his shattered senses was complete repose. The poor old king was put to bed, and everything was done to aid his recovery. In the tent where he lay, attendants watched so that nothing should disturb him, and soft music was played. He had a long, refreshing sleep, and when the moment of awakening came, to the great joy of Cordelia and those who had followed him so faithfully, it was evident that his reason was restored. The first sight on which his eyes opened was the loving face of Cordelia. For a moment the king thought it must be some spirit from heaven, and could scarcely believe that it was indeed his own daughter in flesh and blood. He thought that his wits must still be wandering. "Where have I been? Where am I?" he murmured, looking round with dazed eyes, while the spectators watched with mute anxiety to see what turn his malady would take. "I should die with pity to see another thus. I know not what to say. I will not swear these are my hands. Let's see. I feel this pinprick. Would I were assured of my condition." "Oh, look upon me, sir," entreated Cordelia with her soft voice, "and hold your hands in benediction over me. No, sir, you must not kneel." "Pray do not mock me," said Leir in trembling accents. "I am a very foolish, fond old man, fourscore and upward, not an hour more or less. And to deal plainly, I fear I am not in my perfect mind. Methinks I should know you, and know this man." He looked round in piteous appeal. "Yet I am doubtful, for I am ignorant what place this is. Pray do not mock me, for as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child, Cordelia." "And so I am," cried Cordelia, the tears raining from her tender eyes. "Are your tears wet?" said Leir, touching her cheeks softly, like a child. "Yes, faith, I pray, weep not. If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause. They have not." "No cause, no cause," said Cordelia. "Am I in France?" asked King Lear. "In your own kingdom, sir," said Kent respectfully. "Do not abuse me," pleaded the once haughty king. The good doctor now interposed. He bade Cordelia be comforted. The madness was cured, but there was danger in letting the king brood over what had passed. He must not be troubled with further talking until his shaken senses were more securely settled. "Will it please your highness walk?" asked Cordelia with her sweet grace of manner. "You must bear with me," said the old man humbly. "Pray you, now, forget and forgive. I am old and foolish." And so, subdued in mind and crushed in spirit, clinging to the child whom he had spurned, the once fiery and impetuous monarch was tenderly led away by his loving daughter. It would be pleasant if the story could end here, and if we could leave the tempest-tossed old king in the cherished keeping of the gentle Cordelia. But a sadder fate for both was at hand. The King of France had been suddenly called back to his own land by business which imported so much fear and danger to the state that his personal return was absolutely necessary. In his absence the French forces were attacked by the British troops of Goneril and Regan, under the command of a treacherous son of the loyal Earl of Gloucester called Edmund. Unfortunately, on this occasion the British won the battle, and Cordelia and King Lear were both captured. Edmund ordered them away to prison, whither King Lear went joyously enough, for he was quite happy at being again with his daughter. As soon as they had gone, Edmund dispatched an officer to the prison with secret instructions, which he ordered him to carry out at once. Scarcely had this been done when a flourish of trumpets announced the approach of the Duke of Albany, Goneril, and Regan. The Duke of Albany, always of a milder and more merciful nature, had for some time been dissatisfied with the treatment to which the poor old king had been subjected. He was indignant at the Duke of Cornwall's barbarity in putting out the eyes of old Gloucester, and was glad to hear that he had met his just punishment at the hands of the servant whom he had killed for daring to remonstrate with him. Albany now demanded that Lear should be handed over to his keeping, a request which Edmund refused to comply with, giving as pretext that the question of Cordelia and her father required a fitter place for discussion. The Duke of Albany ordered Edmund to obey, saying that he regarded him only as a subject in this war and not as his brother, whereupon Regan interposed and declared that she had invested Edmund with full authority, therefore he was quite the equal of Albany. Moreover, she intended to marry him. An angry discussion now arose between the two sisters. Goneril had also taken a fancy to this Edmund, and had not scrupled to lay a plot to get her husband killed so that she might marry him. Knowing Regan's designs, she had added to her crimes by secretly poisoning her sister in order to get her out of the way, and even while they were disputing, the drug began to take effect, and in a few minutes Regan was dead. Goneril's husband, however, had discovered the plot against himself, and now he publicly denounced his wife. In ungovernable fury at the failure of her schemes, and refusing to give any answer to the Duke of Albany's accusations, Goneril hurried away and took her own life. Thus miserably perished these two hard-hearted and wicked women. Edmund, in the meanwhile, wounded to death by his own brave half-brother Edgar, who had appeared as a champion to punish Edmund for his many horrible acts of treachery and wickedness, now confessed that he and Goneril had given private instructions that Cordelia was to be hanged in prison, and had intended to lay the blame on her own despair, which had caused her to do this desperate deed. Messengers were sent in haste to arrest this fatal order, but alas, it was too late. As Edmund was borne away, King Lear entered, bearing the dead body of Cordelia in his arms. The old man's reason was again tottering on the brink of madness, and the spectators could only listen in pitying sorrow to his frenzied grief over his murdered child. One moment he mourned her as dead, the next he tried to persuade himself she was still living. He called for a looking-glass to see if her breath would mist or stain it, a proof that she lived, and held a feather to her lips and thought it stirred. The Earl of Kent came and knelt before him, but the king turned from him impatiently, and bent again over Cordelia, where she lay on the ground. "Cordelia, Cordelia, stay a little," he implored in piteous accents. "Ha, what is it thou sayest?" He lent his ear to listen, and with eager self-deception tried to explain his failure to hear a sound. Her voice was ever soft, gentle, and low, an excellent thing in woman. Then with a sudden change he drew himself up, and looking around, cried exultingly, "I killed the slave that was a-hanging thee." "'Tis true, my lords, he did," said an officer who was standing by. "Did I not, fellow?" said the king proudly. "I have seen the time with my good biting falchion. I would have made them skip. I am old now, and these same crosses spoil me. Who are you? Mine eyes are not of the best. I'll tell you in a minute. Are you not Kent?" "The same, your servant Kent." But the king's last gleam of reason was going, and Kent in vain tried to make him realize the fact of his own loyal fidelity, and that the cruel Goneril and Regan were dead. The king's thoughts were again with his beloved child. "And my poor fool is hanged. No, no, no life," he wailed in heartbroken accents. "Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more, never, 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 never. Pray you, undo this button." He made a choking movement at the cloak at his throat, and someone stepped forward and gently unclasped it for him. "Thank you, sir. Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there, look there." And with a strange cry of mingled joy and anguish, King Lear fell dead on the body of his dear child Cordelia. And so, with all his faults and follies, which had assuredly wrought out their own bitter retribution, the fiery-hearted king passed into the realm of eternal rest.